So you know that saying, it can't be tied if it's liquid? Well, that's where cutting torches come in play, and is probably the handiest wrench I have. That's why I have one on this truck. But I got to thinking, there's a lot of people that probably don't know how to use one of these. So I figured I'd make a little video and maybe get it to where you can try it out next time you're around one. I came into the shop here for a little better view, and my gauges are a little messed up on my truck, but this is the typical setup you're going to see. The bigger bottle is always going to be the oxygen. Now the smaller bottle, usually black, is going to be your acetylene or the fuel to the oxygen. So they come in all kinds of different sizes, but here's your typical size. And if we come up to it, each bottle on top is going to have its own regulator. The smaller black bottle is going to be your acetylene or your fuel. The bigger green bottle is going to be your oxygen, or O. So A always comes before O. Now, before I turn the gauges or the tanks on, I want to make sure our torch body is closed. It's got 3 different knobs on there. We'll go through those here in a second. But so if we're going to turn our fuel on first, we're going to go ahead and crack the valve open. And I turn it on about an 1/8 turn. The reason for that is if there's a fire breaks out, or worst case scenario, you can shut this valve off pretty quick and stop the fuel to the flame. So if we look at, since we got the tank on, each regulator is going to have 2 gauges. The bigger number is always going to be your tank pressure, or what's left in the tank. So I have around 900 psi. And the smaller gauge is going to be what you're regulating to your hose. So a rule of thumb, there's going to be some argument on this, but 5 psi and 25 psi. So 5 for fuel, 25 for oxygen, or a nickel and a quarter. That's always going to get you going and get you pretty close to where you need to be, and it's more than likely going to be fine. So since this is on, we're showing around 6 psi, but we want to make sure that we really have 6 psi going to that. So if you look at your torch body, F is going to be for fuel and O is going to be for oxygen. And the one up here is your flame adjustment, or another oxygen valve. So F is for fuel, and we done turned that tank on. We're going to crack this valve so you can hear it coming out. And since we opened it, see it dropped down to 5. Now if we want to adjust that, we can go up with this regulator or go down, but it's really only going to change if the valve is open. So now that we got that set at 5, we're going to go ahead and shut this valve. Then we're going to move to the oxygen. So we know that valve's closed. We're going to go ahead and open it. Now this one you can go ahead and open quite a bit. A lot of people like to open it all the way. I don't necessarily do that every time. So same deal. Our higher gauge is our tank pressure. So a lot more pressure here. We're looking at around 1600 psi. And if we're looking at the low pressure, what we're sending to our hose, it's already set to about 30 psi. So same deal. We can open up our oxygen valve. O for oxygen. We're going to crack it open. But this valve only opens oxygen to this valve. So see, I got that thing open, but no oxygen is coming out. So in order to get oxygen, I would have to pull this trigger. So that is what we're regulating to our torch body at the time. So if you want to pull this trigger, you can see I'm still about 25 psi, and that's going to get us pretty close to where we need to be. So now that we have our pressure set, we're going to go ahead and light this thing up. So fuel, oxygen. We're going to keep the oxygen off because we don't need none of that right now. We're going to crack the fuel open, just barely. So now that we got the fuel open, we're going to go ahead and light it up. We can use a striker here, and that's going to light it. Now see how this black is coming off of this? That's because it's a low pressure right now. And we're going to go ahead and turn this valve slowly until this flame rises and that smoke is just barely smoking. See, if I go fast, the smoke's completely gone. Now I'll slow this down. See, I got a little bit of black smoke. Now that I got a little bit of black smoke, I got my fuel where I want it. Now, this is your oxygen. Like I said, this only puts oxygen up to this. This is what controls your oxygen to your flame. So I can go ahead and leave this valve open. We got oxygen up to here. Now that we got oxygen up to here, we're going to add it to the flame. So this knob, we're going to crack it. slowly, see it's adding oxygen, and see how there's this white cone appearing? So we're gonna turn this until that cone comes all the way down. And it may be hard to see on camera, but you got about 5 little cones it turns into. Now that's where you want it, but the important thing is here, this is gonna heat your metal, but when you wanna cut the metal, you gotta pull this trigger. So when you pull the trigger, you want these cones to stay exactly how they look. See, nothing's really changing, but if I had this oxygen set too rich or too low, let me turn it down here, see, that's not what you want. You want a uniform cone when you hit the trigger. So, when you got that set up, we're ready to cut. So, but when we want to shut it off, we're going to go ahead and kill the oxygen, and then we can kill the fuel. But pro tip here is, if you're cutting something and it catches on fire, there's always going to be oxygen here. So say I got a little fire right here, that's pure oxygen. That's going to blow it out. I just remembered I forgot to mention, when you're using these, you always want to have eye protection, obviously, but it needs to be a shaded protection. A pair of sunglasses will do just fine, or a lot of welding helmets have a setting for cutting. That's what it's for. So you want to go ahead and strike it up, get you a small bit of smoke. Go ahead and bring that oxygen in. So when you're cutting a piece of metal, you want to warm it up. You're going to have to warm it up before you do anything. So I'm going to get this thing a little bit hotter. So I'll start warming this metal up until it turns orange. You're basically melting the metal, but see, my cones are not touching the metal. It's just barely off of it, maybe about 1/8 inch. So once I get that good orange color, I can pull the trigger a little bit, make sure it's good and hot. See, it blew right through it. So when I'm ready, I'll just pull that trigger and just move it up slowly. And it'll cut right through about anything. Now say you kind of get off track and it quits, you just gotta warm it up again and start over. Man, before you know it, a little bit of practice and your piece will come right off.